Fresh air.
Hi, I'm Maisie McCabe, UK editor of Campaign, and welcome to Campaign's Media360 podcast, produced by Fresh Air Production, and recorded here at the 21st Conference in the Grand Hotel, Brighton. This year's theme was risk and innovation, so for this series we spoke to a huge range of marketing leaders to explore how they and their teams push the boundaries for their brands and clients. In this episode, Fresh Air's Director of Content, Michaela Hallam, spoke to Helen Saul, the Head of Marketing at Shelter.
Welcome back to another episode of the Media360 podcast, brought to you with Campaign and Fresh Air. I am now sat down with Helen Saul, who is Head of Marketing at Shelter. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
We're doing a bit of a thing where we're saying, okay, so these job titles are things that we're all familiar with, but in reality, what does Head of Marketing mean for you on a day-to-day basis?
That's a great question, especially because I work for a charity and I think people often misinterpret it. Most people think head of marketing charity, she must just bring in money and that's it.
Right.
But in reality, there's a lot more to it than that. There's things like we need to influence the government to do things that will end homelessness. We need to make sure that people who use our services know how and when to access it. We have retail shops across the country. So there's lots of different elements that all come together, and there is no day that's the same, but I really enjoy it.
And are you responsible for all three of those areas that you've just highlighted?
Yeah, so my team mostly cover those core areas, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. We're here today at Media360 in Brighton. The theme this year is risk. And we've been using this question to get to know each of our contributors a little bit better. What's the biggest risk that you've ever taken?
In life or in work?
In life to start with. We'll go
nice
both.
Easy question to
I know, let's just start gently.
I would say I've moved around a lot. A few years ago, I just decided to go and live in Lisbon for a few months, so that's quite a big risk. And I've also lived in France, and I think anytime you move to a new country or a new place without knowing anybody, sometimes speaking a different language, that is...
Without knowing anybody as well, wow.
Yeah, and now some of my best friends are people that I met when I lived in Lisbon, so it was a risk that paid off for sure.
And what's that taught you?
It's taught me that you have to put yourself out of your comfort zone if you want to do really great things. And the connections that I've made and the people that are now going to be in my life for a really long time, that would have never happened if I hadn't just thought, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to go and move to a country that I've never been to before. Don't speak the language yet, but I'll give it a go. And I think that pays off. The worst that could have happened is I might not have enjoyed it and I could have always come home.
Yes.
So it's worth giving things a try.
Brilliant attitude to life. And do you apply that same attitude in your marketing career?
I would really say so. I hope so. I think if you look at my career, I've worked in really different sectors. So previously profit-led brands, now I'm at a charity, and I really try not to put myself in a box. People will often ask, who do you think the best charity ads are? And I don't like to think in that way. I'd rather think in a way that is considering how can we do our own thing that's really good, that's different to everybody else. And certainly we do take risks, and it's really important that because we're talking about a topic of housing, homelessness, that we are not afraid to call out when things are wrong and when things that should be happening aren't happening. And we're not afraid to do that. We're not afraid to say to the government, this is where you haven't held up your end of the bargain. And I think that's really important if we're going to make progress.
How does that play into the theme of risk? What's the work that you've done that has kind of pushed you to feel uncomfortable or to make people feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, there's lots of examples. One thing that we did last year, we did a campaign around the cost of living crisis, and we sort of took the mick out of all the things that people say, where they say, here's some ways that you could save money, like why don't you cancel your Netflix, or
okay.
Eat less avocados, don't buy oat milk lattes. And we kind of depicted all of these things, and then we said, here's a good hack for you. Why doesn't the government just make housing affordable? And that was at risk. We knew it was going to incite some
Provoke.
conversation. Yeah, but we weren't provoking for provoking's
Yeah.
sake. There was an intent behind it, and we wanted to get the messaging across. And it was at a time when all of the conversation was just about this one topic of a cost of living crisis, and we needed to be heard. So we were happy to lean into that in a funny way, but a way that would get people talking about it and sharing it with their friends, and that's exactly what they did.
On the theme of your work, you've done some really interesting work with IKEA.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so Shelter have an 8-year partnership with IKEA. I think it makes perfect sense. Obviously, we're both very focused on home.
Yeah.
And some of the things that we've done in the last year or so, it's still quite a new partnership, is that we created a room set within IKEA stores. So when customers went in and they were expecting to see a normal bedroom or something like that, instead what they saw is a typical bedroom that someone who is living in temporary accommodation, i.e. accommodation that they've been forced to live in because there isn't enough good quality housing. We created what it looks like, and we did that with people who actually are living in a place like that. So it was really true to the reality. And we then took that to some of the party conferences as well, so that politicians could see it. And it really was a really big talking point, because people didn't expect to see it in that place.
I think there's something about contextual marketing in that sense, in terms of disrupting your expected experience in a way that is really relevant, that I really enjoy about that work.
Yeah, it's both contextual and not, because it's not the context that people are expecting to see in that place, but it's linked to the home environment, and therefore really stopped people in their tracks and got people talking.
So you're saying it stopped people in their tracks, it got people talking. What are the other sort of metrics that you would use to measure success for a campaign like that? There's not an ROI as such, so how do you measure success?
There's a lot of different ways that we measure success, and for something like that, you have the version which is in store, and then you also have the version which is at party conferences. And actually that was one piece of activity that we did alongside a lot of other things outside both Labour and Conservative Party conference. And we had our marketing messages both on billboards outside the conference, we had things on the street, and there was a lot of other activity around it. And then together you can measure both what politicians are actually saying as a result of seeing your work. You can also measure what the reaction is online. And even with our campaigning activity, where we're trying to primarily change attitudes or get the government to listen to something, there is often also a fundraising element as well to it, where people can donate as well, because we're charity and we need to make sure that we are both making money as well as creating change.
You've referenced a couple of times the responsibility that you have to raise these issues with government. Will you be running specific campaigns around the general election?
Absolutely, yes. Yes. So, we've just launched a campaign last week about social housing, which is the issue that we want the general election to be about, because we know that if you build good quality social homes, that is the way to end all of the housing problems. And we're going to be amping that up in the run-up to the general election. Of course, we're definitely going to have messaging around the election, and also once whoever's elected is in office, because for us, we need to make sure that whoever is voted in, they're going to be ready to listen to the issues that relate to housing. They're going to do things about it, and we need them to understand that this is what people really care about, and that if they want people's votes, then they have to agree to take action on housing. And so that's something that you can definitely expect to see from us this year.
It feels like all of this is about us collaborating on collective solutions to a fundamental problem. Talking about collaboration, how do you push the people around you to feel comfortable enough to be able to take risks? Because risks inherently mean that some things aren't always going to work out, and there is going to be a risk of failure. So how do you encourage and actively advocate for an environment, a working environment where risk is acceptable and encouraged?
It's a good question, and I think it's really important. And first of all, I think as a leader of a team, you have to be someone that is there to sort of accept the fallback, if there is any fallback from the risk. That's important. You have to really encourage your team around you to go away and test things and lead things on their own, but also know that there is sort of a safety net if things don't go exactly according to plan. And a really big one is that you've got to be honest about your own risk-taking, failures, things that haven't gone right. And there was a really interesting article actually earlier this year in the Harvard Business Review, and it was talking about how leaders often miscommunicate in times of high tension. And one of the big things that people do is that they just talk about good stuff. And that actually ends up really worrying people that are already in a tense environment, because they think, well, I've done something wrong, but I'm not hearing about any failures. I'm only hearing about good stuff. And therefore they become more protective and they don't share when things go wrong, and therefore no one can learn from them because
I think
you're
people
not open about it.
really respect when other people put their hands up and share when things haven't gone right, because it means that you can learn from that. And it means that you can empathise with and have the courage, I think, to participate in that kind of boundary pushing. Talking about boundary pushing, we talked earlier about IKEA being a brilliant example of a brand relationship. Do you find that other brands are really keen to work with you, or is there a little bit of tension and nervousness about the politics, about the boundary pushing there?
I would say the answer is both. So because we are a really well-recognised brand in charity, we're really lucky in that we do frequently have people coming to us and saying, we would like to work with you and we want to partner with you.
Are they brands or personalities, potential ambassadors, or both?
Both.
Right.
So it is brands, we have celebrities that will come to us, we have different agencies. A lot of people will regularly come to Shelton and say, would love to work with you, which is super fortunate place to be in. That said, also, because we are really happy to talk about politics and we're really happy to say what needs changing, not every brand or partner is actually necessarily going to be ready to take that level of risk. And maybe if they're not willing to talk up about the fact that we need social housing, then maybe they're not necessarily the right partner for us.
That makes sense. You're joining us on the very first Media360 podcast. Thank you for doing that. Podcasting in itself is actually a relatively new medium, particularly for brands to start taking advantage of. And audio in particular is stronger than ever. Commercial radio is done brilliantly. You do use audio. Is it an opportunity that you're excited by?
Definitely. We've actually just, in the campaign that we have live now, which is called Made in Social Housing, we've just put podcasting into the media plan for the first time since I joined Shelter. So it's a very relevant topic. It's live. We're, waiting to see the results. And so it's something that is really exciting to me, for sure.
Previously had a podcast, and it was before your time. And it was really interesting because it's had tops and tails where you've used your ambassadors and your celebrity talent to kind of frame the content and to bring another audience. Is creating your own podcast something that you might consider in the future?
On a personal level, so I actually did have a podcast called Mad Influence where I interviewed industry leaders who were using their influence for positive reasons, because typically marketing can have a bit of a bad reputation, and I really loved doing it, and I am intending to relaunch it. So there you go, there's an exclusive for you.
Excellent, we'll look out for that. And what about on a brand level? Would Shelter consider creating another podcast?
I think it's definitely something that I'm open to exploring and understanding more about. It's really important for us to have a balance between communicating what the problem is around housing and then also celebrating both when we make progress and telling stories that look at the solution. And I think potentially something long form, which has an opportunity for quite deep engagement, is an area that I can really see us exploring and seeing if it's possible to bring to our audiences on a deeper level.
Thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to talk to me today and for us to hear your story. I've been sat down with Helen Saul, Head of Marketing for Shelter. It's been a brilliant conversation, much appreciated. And looking forward to talking to you again. Looking forward to your podcast.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to be here. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Campaign Media360 podcast, presented by Michaela Hallam, the Director of Content at Fresh Air Production, our podcast partner. There are lots more conversations to hear with a great range of marketing leaders, so please follow on your favoured platform so you don't miss an episode.